and also building an optimal energy mix. To what extent has, for example, in the Philippine experience, this had been done, and what best practices or perhaps pitfalls to avoid that you would share with us on the road to a green energy transition and basically towards becoming a contributor to the solution of climate change from the energy perspective?
Yes, it was quite surprising 2 years or 3 years back when our own government came up with what they call the 8-point program. And he said on the medium term, he said we want green jobs, green future. And it was quite surprising. It did not show in the platform of the winning candidate. But since then, we have seen some details into it. They call the Philippine Energy Plan that they launched, I think, a year ago, last year. And they have identified how we can reach 50% renewable in the Philippines by focusing on high renewable and more for, I think, offshore. Really a big push on offshore energy and a mix of nuclear and the decommissioning, or it sounds better, repurposing of some coal plants or diesel plants. So that's the plan. And they came up with specific initiatives, regulatory initiatives that fast-track permitting. So we see an increase this past 2 years of what our government calls indicative projects. That means those who have asked are working through permitting, and some are already at the committed stage. It means we are on the way to having those renewables. But in between, of course, is still the reality that renewable energy are intermittent. So the natural gas is something that we can see as transition energy. That's why there's an attempt by our own Malampayan, our only, the Philippines' only oil or gas generating field to explore more. So I think they're exploring 3 oil wells this year. They will start drilling as they have identified areas. So there is that direction. And I did not realize how important it was because a month ago I was invited to speak in a closed-door wind energy summit. And part of the reason why they wanted someone from the Philippines is we could be part of those best practices. And now we have shifted in such a short time to really encourage more investment in the renewable area, where we have identified where wind farms can be built, where even our own forestry initiative by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources have identified some areas within our forest that can have solar panels. And as I've said, even the push to identify areas where nuclear plants can be built, even small modular reactors, to push our move towards or away from fossil fuel-driven energy source.
Thank you very much for that. Is that thank you, and that is something that perhaps the rest of ASEAN can also consider in the fact that it is possible to have that success in effecting an energy transition without sacrificing economic development.
I think that means you don't need to fast track it. Yeah, okay. That's why I think it's a 2050 plan for the Philippines. So initially 2040, but I think reality, I look at it as maybe a 25-year plan. Enough to stay committed to what our country has committed to COP.
Sir, for both speakers, of course, we are looking at it from, again, these are transboundary problems, these are common issues, regional, but also global issues. But the thing is, of course, as the part of the so-called ASEAN way is the emphasis on sovereignty and the action of sovereign states. What about the role of cross-ASEAN and trans-ASEAN institutions? Above all, the ASEAN Secretariat, above all, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. What role would they play? Should they be the focus of these efforts at cooperation? Should they be strengthened, or do we need other steps? Should we take an institutionalist focus on these organs, or should we focus, for example, on building a normative treaty instead of building on these existing organs? Can we make them a focus? Should we strengthen the Secretariat? And if yes, how?
we start normative, define, and me, I'm a believer of the role of private sector. So if you create the necessary environment, and that's the role of ASEAN governments, ASEAN nation states, then encourage also the private sector to be part of it. Then even beyond ASEAN, encourage the international community, willing private sector investors to help us, or willing civil society organizations to be part of it, or scientific community. So that's how I envision things. But we need to start by being normative, defining what it is.
Dr. Building on that, but also there's a plan, of course, to build the ASEAN Declaration on Environmental Rights. Right? Is that a step in the right direction, or is that something that we should supplement with, as you know, that other efforts in order to build awareness and commitment within ASEAN?
Well, strictly speaking, as a scientist, we have enough declarations, isn't it not? And yeah, no doubt declarations are great. Declarations are great on paper, but operationalized, action-oriented kind of declaration is what we dearly need. And I concur with Prof. Dindo says that normalize it first. Really identify what is the problem and what do we want to achieve. That's number one. And I'm a strong believer also in top-down as well as bottom-up. It cannot always be a secretariat work. If it is secretariat work all the time, it will just stay at secretariat. They will be overwhelmed, and after 2 years, we might just come to a complete halt again. So I really believe that the centers can be empowered more, definitely. They should take more leadership role in helping the secretariat. So that's where your bottom-up comes from, as well as, of course, our political will to really do something. So that's where our country's leaders should is a very big word again. I should be politically right. Can enforce such will, and then you will see fruits happening. So most of the time, as I say, declarations are great, beautiful in words, beautiful to hear, but who is going to operationalize is something that is always in question most of the time. Yeah.
And who will spend, of course.
I just refraining from saying that more investment. Yeah. So that's why the PPP.
That's why I believe the idea of private sector. Declarations are nice. I always say, if there's no budget supporting a declaration, it's nothing. So we take note of the possible role of investors, private sector.
Thank you very much. Now we will open the floor to questions from the stage. Sir, the gentleman from the back.
Directly relate to scientific research, but it does contain some scientific elements. That is the preservation and research on underwater cultural heritage. And I think the South China Sea, we have to acknowledge, in the same spirit that, there are no external actors, but there are user states. I think South China Sea has historically been a maritime crossroad. And I think it's also important here to emphasize that some countries, say China, has politicized and weaponized maritime archaeology to suit its own historical narrative, historical right. So I think, and I think it also relates to the PCA Tribunal Award, in which it says that Chinese mariners have operated in the South China Sea in the past, but they were not exclusive operators in there, and there were many Southeast Asian mariners as well who operated in the South China Sea. So I think this is another element where regional countries can collaborate under Pillar 3 of ASEAN socio-cultural community and try to explore really not just our terrestrial heritage, but also underwater heritage. And this is the kind of things that we need to discuss and collaborate more. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. May I invite comments from Professor Manhid in particular regarding this. As noted, is the fact that when it comes to underwater cultural heritage, the PRC is exploiting the alleged presence of maritime archaeological deposits as proof of historical proof of activity and therefore of some proprietary or sovereign rights. To what extent can ASEAN work together to counter this?
We can counter by, I have a bias that, not because one claims that argument, that works. That's why I am a great believer. When we built the case that was filed January 22, 2013, the whole idea there was we all relate to each other in ASEAN, in the broader ASEAN, in the Indo-Pacific, based on rules that we have accepted. So, because we know that the argument of China had no basis except their idea of history. That's why it's history. It's a story that they claim to be. So, and we all argued then, as I was advising the Philippine government, that it's international law that is the great equalizer. And that's why among ASEAN, we respect each other because we respect international law. We respect the rules we have in ASEAN. And that's why we have the problem really with China. Because others will argue the movements of ships in those areas. Even the Bajo de Masinloc was Portuguese. So a lot of, so they can lay claim to that. So a lot of, or even the artifacts of the galleon trade in the Philippines. So I was saying Mexico can lay claim to that also, the so-called Acapulco to Manila trade that passes through the South China Sea. So, but they will not. Those countries will not because they believe that we, at this modern era, we are governed by international law, a rules-based order. That's why in ASEAN, we don't have a problem. We respect or strength of ASEAN, the member states.
Thank you very much for that. A question from the back.
Thank you so much. So I have two questions. One of them can be answered due to interest of time and to give way for others. So the first one is, given the Philippines' increasing reliance on imported energy, particularly in the context of the Malampaya gas field's anticipated decline by 2027, what are the most significant geopolitical risks to Philippine energy security stemming from the current maritime situation in the South China Sea? And the second one is, how can the Philippines leverage its scientific institutions and MRI, Marine Research Institute capabilities to better understand the environmental impacts of its existing and planned energy infrastructure and to inform more sustainable energy development policies?
I'll go back to Professor Manhid.
Yeah, I've done. The Malampaya gas field. Also been quite aggressive to explore more, and the Department of Energy has been encouraging, and we have seen players from outside countries trying to look at different oil fields. And for our guest here, the reason why we really stood up for our exclusive economic zone is because of our desire to extract these resources for our own energy security. That was the story of the beyond the so-called Scarborough, so the 2012 harassment of our exploratory ships in the wreck to bank. But beyond that, of course, the push for renewables, as I said, offshore winds, solar power, so it creates that balance, that energy mix that can provide energy security and nuclear energy. And that is where I believe the scientific community is critical. We have to help the private sector protect the marine biodiversity as we extract more from these areas. And for one that works with the private sector, we should not be afraid to engage with them. A lot of academic community will always blame the big business. And my first question to them, have you met with them? The answer is no. Have you seen them operate? No. They just read about it. So it's good to engage. It's good to talk to them and even become partners. So there is that room. As I said, private sector, government, and even international community with their technical capacity can really ensure energy security, not only in the Philippines, but in the rest of ASEAN nations.
We will take two questions at a time. First, from Dr. Lagman and Dr. Ko. And then thereafter, from Dr. Ordaniel and Dr. Mon. And thereafter, from,
Okay,
Dr.
thank
Lagman?
you so much. In terms of marine scientific research, I would just like to share ASEAN experience, not on the formality of an ASEAN agreement, but on project-based cooperation. For example, the gift fish, the genetically improved farm tilapia, was actually an effort within the ASEAN countries on a grant by the ADB, UNDP, and World Fish. The ASEAN-Australian Coral Reef Initiative, where we developed all these methodologies and surveys, was actually an ASEAN, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia effort under the auspices of the Australian Institute of Marine Science. The giant clam protection initiative that went for a long decade is actually part of the Solomon Islands ACR funded, and it included Malaysia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So I would say that it is not new to the ASEAN for different countries in multi-country agreements, but there has always been the X that has funded, that has initiated, that has developed the relationship, got us into discussions, signed our agreements, and come into MOAs. But when those projects end, that also ends. So the question now was, how do we continue this kind of multilateral scientific research? I would say one that I was particularly leading was called Population Interdependencies in the South China Sea Ecosystem. And it involved Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Solomon Islands. And this was funded by the John D. Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. But in all of these, we had to try and get, my recent one was under the Partnership for Enhanced Engagement in Research, which is an NSF-funded program which involves students. So we scientists run on the grant-making, publication, student development sort of mechanism. And that our hope is that what we train them to do will be carried on forward. And as I was just talking to Dr. Wu, he knows a lot of the people I've known in the past, and this is way back in the 1990s. So I think that is a very relevant one, but when government comes in, we get into problems.
Thank you, Raj. Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that. It's a question, therefore, of sustainability, both financial and political.
Political, financial,
Yes.
and recognition of the long, saving it, keeping it, and valuing it
Thank you.
beyond such things.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm Dr. Ko.
Thank you, Professor Silva, and many thanks to Dr. Wu and Professor Manhit. I just want to build on Andy's earlier point about underwater heritage to talk more about the aspect of maritime archaeology. is something that I believe China is pretty strong at, not just in terms of the capacity that it provides. I mean, the various research institutes in China, both in university and with state think tanks, and they have actually dedicated oceanography institutes dealing with this altogether. And they do not just simply do their own research, but they actually work very closely with the other counterpart institutions within Southeast Asia for that. But that is, to me, not so much of a biggest problem. The problem appears to be the sort of collaboration being done on the social cultural basis, whereby the Chinese government would try to promote what it views to be common maritime heritage and use that as a way to promote social cultural collaboration in the maritime sphere. For example, with Malaysia, there is a lot of talk about the common preservation of Zheng He's voyages and try to work together in that. So do you see, how these might potentially, impinge upon Southeast Asia or intra-ASEAN, collaboration in maritime archaeology? Do you see that as necessarily zero-sum, or do you see that as potentially helping our intra-ASEAN efforts to build that particular area? Thank you so much.
Okay, for Dr. Wu there, for the question of sustaining cooperative scientific projects, financial, scientific, and political sustainment. It's not new, but we have encountered problems in making them last beyond the project term. Is there any way that ASEAN and its mechanisms can be used in order to solve these problems? For example, the ASEAN ministerial meeting on scientific cooperation.
I would like to respond to two things. Right from the beginning of cultural heritage, and then, but I will respond to the question. It is very correct at your observation on that. We always, the funding always comes from a third party that bring us all to work together. Now it comes from Canada, IDRC, it comes from Solomon Island for our giant clam. Gift is always outside funding looking at the potentials of ASEAN. The true meaning is that ASEAN has the greatest potential in scientific minds and scientific research. It is here. What is lacking here is that we need another person to come and say, hey, I'm giving you this, come work together as an ASEAN. They don't call it ASEAN, they call it a multilateral kind of collaboration. At the end of the thing is where the investments are, right? So I really love what he's saying, going towards PPP kind of model, not just relying on government kind of supported projects, integrating more of these private-public kind of partnership programs within ASEAN. That is what rejuvenation that we need. But we have done this many or several times. We know how a model it works. It works. When money pours in, everybody comes to work together. After money goes off, thank you very much. Salamat po, thank you very much, and bye-bye. We'll see you again when we get the next one. So the continuous kind of investment is very important. That's point number one. The natural. I really love cultural heritage. When we talk about science, we always talk about our natural heritage. There is a lot of reason why. So I would like to highlight in 2004 what we did in Malaysia is very important. In 2004, we have been so many years of independence. Only in 2004 we did a meaningful kind of natural heritage, kind of biodiversity survey in those small little reefs that we are claiming, right? So that is very important. But right until today, as I talked to our Deputy Director General, data is there, but we can't be sharing it out. Most important thing that we found is also a simple thing like naming of reefs. All our reefs are British names. But before those British names existed, we do have our own original names. First priority is to bring back our own heritage names of our reefs. For example, we have Luconia, we have Ardisia, we have I don't know. These are Malaysian claims. All right? So I'm not creating, yeah? Those reefs have their own original names, named by the local. Politics aside, boundaries aside, the Philippine people have their own names for the same area. Bringing back that natural name is very, extremely important as a first claim. If you can't even name it, if you don't know what is down there, if you do not know your room has how many pillows, probably you are sleeping in the wrong room. Or the wrong one. Okay? So that's my 2 cents on that point. Thank you very much.
We will go straight first to the questions of Dr. Daniel and Dr. Mon. Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to address this question to Dr. Wu, but also to all the scientists in the room, especially Southeast Asian scientists, because yesterday I mentioned that WPS is expanding its work, its programming to include providing opportunities to scientists to collaborate in research. And so I'm wondering, however, how comfortable are you in working together collaboratively in areas where you have overlapping claims? Is that an issue? For example, there's an opportunity for Filipinos, Vietnamese, Malaysian, Indonesian scientists coming together in their private capacity or through opportunities provided by academia to go to an area, conduct research, but you guys have overlapping EEZs there. Is that going to be an issue, or are you comfortable with that because your goal is science and you don't really care about the territorial or maritime disputes? So just a curious question, because that is very helpful in how we think about engaging with the scientific community as we expand our programming. Thank you.
And Dr. Suaimon?
Thank you, Sue from National University of Singapore. My question is relating to energy security. And for energy security in ASEAN, one of the initiatives of ASEAN is ASEAN Power Grid. It is a regional initiative to connect the power grids of all 10 member countries of ASEAN. And the goal is to achieve fully integrated grid by 2045, which is within 20 years' time. So while working towards that, would there be any policy and also legal reforms be required for this initiative to be effectively implemented? And has there been any initiatives in your respective countries regarding this initiative for this ASEAN Power Grid in particular? Thank you.
We will start with that question first, Professor Manhit.
My understanding is that it's moving towards that direction, and the Philippines is of course the last mile because of our geographic and archipelagic. But I was just having a discussion last week with ASEAN Energy Secretariat, and they're quite positive in terms of outlook, because I've been hearing this discussion over a decade ago, and they said it's moving forward. So when they asked me, I said, of course, I think we have to accept that the Philippines will be our own last mile. But it's good that our southern part is now connected also in our national grid. So that's the closest to the rest of Southeast Asia. So I remain of the belief that it will happen soon, but we just have to be we have to take note of who will control the grid, because I know for a fact that it's an outsider from ASEAN has been proposing this. No, I will just whisper who, maybe with C.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Dr. Wu, speaking on behalf of all the scientists in the room, perhaps, what is the comfort level of scientists for you personally, for disputed areas, or are there parameters that scientists would observe or safeguards to observe?
Well, this is on camera, so I might lose my job. But no, on the serious note, this is exactly what I meant by science diplomacy, right? This is the hard decision. this is where science can really tell stories that despite we quarrel, despite we might want to strangle each other, there are commonalities that we can come. It's from science. Because scientists mostly are blind like what I am blind. We don't really look at territory. We really look at the sea. So I think it is possible. But I'm also speaking in front of my dear Deputy Director General, of course. I am subjected to tell Mr. Mr. DG, right, to inform, rightly inform. But I think this is something that we can work towards too. It is very positive. This kind of initiative is exactly what Professor has been saying. We need this kind of ASEAN-driven science together. Solve this together, leverage it as a diplomacy, as science diplomacy, to really close rank and to see that we really see things in a similar, very, very similar way. And we can really resolve our differences, you know. Science is science. If you want to talk about territory, we can really resolve. But those kind of activities will really close the people together. And then our resolution will be much, 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 much more family-like as what ASEAN is always be. Right. That's my response. Yeah.
Thank you. Now unfortunately, we have only about 2 minutes left, so I would like to invite, okay, one last question on the left.
Kim Resmay from the Cambodian Center for Regional Study. Thank you, the moderator and the two speakers for interesting the discussion. I have only 2 questions. The first one is why, in your view, why ASEAN members tend to have a tendency not to step up their own investment and resources in a more regional effort in environmental protection and marine diversity protection that the two speakers speak about, and tend to have a tendency to rely on external sources. That's my first question. Second question is, do you foresee in the near future that there will be such a regional commission like ASEAN Maritime Commission that work, have a real authority to promote research, maritime research, and have a more mandate to, galvanize environmental protection in the maritime space in Southeast Asia? So do you foresee that this kind of effort can be realized in the near future? Thank you.
May I invite both speakers to answer that and then make that also their closing statement? Dr. Wu and then Professor Manhit.
All right. Why? Probably we have already realized ASEAN is in a region that is extremely unique to any part of the world. In this span of small little place, we speak languages that is totally different from one another sometimes. That's a very big thing we need to recognize. It's a uniqueness of us, but it's also something that may have hampered slightly a little bit of our understanding. That's number one. Number two, culturally we are also very different. Number three, our development level of each country in ASEAN is also very extremely different. That kind of disparity we cannot dispel. And in order for us to really close gap, we really need to help each other out here. We can't leave Cambodia alone. We can't leave Laos alone. Singapore can't just say, I'm nobody, I don't care about ASEAN. That kind of regional cooperation really has to be operationalized. I really like Professor has been saying, declaration is nice, but where is the actions? Right. So that is where I think where we always find that other people see our uniqueness. People want to capitalize how we do things here, but we ourselves have failed to really look at ourselves. Hey, this is what we are. We can really move this, and this could be just the golden model that the world can learn from ASEAN. There's a lot of things the world can learn from ASEAN despite our differences, but we have a very extremely unique people here, extremely unique partners here, work together and really show the world that, this model really works for the world itself. my response, Professor.
Professor Manhit?
I totally agree that we need to collectively work together, member nations of ASEAN, especially in the issue of the topic of this panel, environmental protection, especially on the need for ASEAN scientific community to support this initiative. I've been involved in so many things, been in government, been outside government, and I've always asked for, after the statement, after the declaration, we need to take action. And in this case, the message should be we need to take collective action. And at the core of it is the scientific community to help policymakers to make the decision, put resources collectively, and move it forward.
Thank you very much. Now, what we have learned from this panel and from our excellent panelists is that we have, because of our common problems, it's no longer enough to stick to what one of our panels in the earlier panel called the old ASEAN way of focusing on informality, of being ASEAN as a community of interrelationships. Now we need to act with ASEAN as a community of interresponsibilities. So perhaps we are seeing today in this panel, in the previous panels, you might call it the beginning of a second founding of ASEAN with a new vision and a new idea. So I hope we can take that away from this panel and from the other panels. Thank you all very much. And please give a warm round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you to our final panelists and to all our today's speakers for the thoughtful insights and contributions. Sirs, sa ating mga panelists, you may stay on the stage for photo opportunity. Thank you. Once again, let's give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our today's sessions. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for another day, our last day of critical dialogue and collaboration. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, have a pleasant afternoon to each and everyone. Thank you.